The sky was a vast, indifferent blue on that January morning in 1971, stretching endlessly over the dense Peruvian rainforest. Lancer Flight 508, a Lockheed Electra turboprop, hummed steadily through the thin air, carrying 92 passengers and crew. From Lima to Pucallpa, the flight was routine, the kind of journey where passengers dozed off to the drone of engines or flipped through magazines without a second thought. But nature had other plans. At 21,000 feet, the aircraft entered a thunderstorm, a swirling mass of black clouds and violent updrafts that seized the plane like a toy. Then, without warning, a bolt of lightning struck the fuel tank. The explosion was catastrophic. The aircraft disintegrated mid-air, breaking apart in a shower of metal and fire. Seats, luggage, and bodies were flung into the open sky, tumbling through the storm like leaves in a hurricane. Among them was 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke, still strapped to her seat, suddenly alone in the free fall. The rainforest rushed up to meet her, a green abyss swallowing her whole. Miraculously, the three-seat row she was strapped to had been torn away mostly intact, and as she plummeted, the dense canopy below acted as a natural net. Branches snapped beneath her, slowing her descent until she crashed onto the muddy forest floor, alive but barely conscious. Her collarbone was broken, her right eye swollen shut, and deep gashes marked her arms and legs. Around her, the jungle was silent except for the distant cries of birds and the steady hum of insects. She was utterly alone. For days, Juliane wandered through the Amazon, following shallow streams in hopes of finding civilization. The rainforest was relentless, venomous. Snakes slithered past her feet, mosquitoes swarmed her wounds, and the oppressive heat sapped her strength. She had no food, no clean water, and no way to call for help. Yet she pressed on, driven by sheer will and the lessons her biologist parents had taught her about survival. She avoided the rotting corpses of fellow passengers, half buried in the undergrowth, and ignored the hallucinations brought on by dehydration. On the 10th day, she stumbled upon a small boat moored by a riverbank. Using the last of her strength, she poured gasoline on her wounds to kill the maggots festering inside them, and waited. Hours later, loggers found her, emaciated, feverish, but alive. Against all odds, Juliane had survived a 2-mile fall from the sky and days alone in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Her story was more than just luck. It was a testament to human resilience. The jungle had tried to claim her, just as it had claimed the other 91 souls who perished that day. But Juliane walked out, a living reminder that even in the face of unimaginable horror, survival is sometimes possible. The skies had betrayed her, but the earth, in its own brutal way, had let her go. The Alaskan wilderness in October is a place of eerie beauty and unforgiving extremes. The days grow shorter, the winds sharper, and the temperature plummets with a brutality that warns all but the most prepared to stay indoors. Yet on the afternoon of October 13th, 1972, a Fairchild FH-227D carrying 42 passengers and 5 crew members pierced through the gathering dusk, its twin propellers cutting through the frigid air as it made its way from Anchorage to Juneau. The flight was supposed to be routine, just another commuter hop along the Alaskan coast. But fate had other plans. Somewhere over the icy expanse of the Talkeetna Mountains, the plane encountered turbulence so violent that it wrenched the controls from the pilot's hands. Then came the sickening lurch, a sudden, catastrophic loss of altitude. The aircraft clipped a ridge, shearing off the right wing in an explosion of sparks and metal. What followed was not a controlled crash, but a violent disintegration. The fuselage cartwheeled down the mountainside, breaking apart like a child's toy thrown against stone. When the wreckage finally came to rest, silence swallowed the scene. Snowflakes drifted gently onto twisted metal, torn seats, and the scattered, remnants of human lives. Amid the carnage, a single figure stirred. 24-year-old bank clerk Vesna groaned as consciousness returned. Pain radiated from her legs, her vision swam, and the cold was already seeping into her bones. She had no memory of the impact, no understanding of how she had ended up half buried in snow and debris. All she knew was that she was alive, and that the world around her was a frozen wasteland of death. The crash had been so violent that rescue teams initially assumed no one could have survived. For hours, Vesna lay trapped in the wreckage, her breath forming weak clouds in the air as the temperature dropped well below freezing. Her legs were broken, her ribs cracked, and her skull throbbed from a concussion. Yet somehow, she clung to consciousness, her body shutting down known essential functions to preserve the last flickers of life. It wasn't until the next morning that a search plane spotted the wreckage. By then, hypothermia had set in, and Vesna's pulse was so faint that the medics who found her at first believed she was another corpse. But as they lifted her onto the stretcher, one of them noticed the faintest exhale, a ghost of breath against the frigid air. Against all odds, she had endured a night in sub-zero temperatures, surrounded by the dead, with injuries that should have killed her. The aftermath was a blur of surgeries, rehabilitation, and bewildered doctors shaking their heads in disbelief. Vesna had fallen 33,000 feet, without a parachute, without a safety harness, without anything but sheer dumb luck. Investigators later determined that she had been pinned inside a section of the fuselage that had broken off and tumbled down. The mountain like a sled, cushioning her fall. Even so, the forces involved should have been fatal. Yet here she was, breathing, speaking, alive. Years later, when asked how she survived, Vesna would simply shrug and say, "I was born under a lucky star." But her story was more than luck. It was a defiance of physics, a middle finger to mortality. The mountains had tried to claim her, just as they had claimed the other 46 souls on board. But Vesna walked away, a living miracle, proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the sky spits you back out. The air over the Colombian Andes was thick with turbulence on the morning of May 26, 1972. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, a Fairchild FH-227D, carrying 45 passengers and crew, rattled through the storm clouds as it navigated the treacherous mountain pass between Mendoza, Argentina and Santiago, Chile. On board were members of the Old Christians Club rugby team, along with their friends and family, all in high spirits despite the worsening weather. The plane was off course, a critical navigational error that would soon hurtle them into one of the most infamous survival ordeals in aviation history. At 3:21 p.m., the pilots realized their mistake too late. The jagged peaks of the Andes erupted. From the clouds directly ahead, a desperate pull-up was attempted, but the aircraft's belly clipped the mountainside at 17,000 feet, shearing off the tail section in an instant. What followed was a nightmarish descent, a chaotic, screaming plunge down the glacier-strewn slope as the fuselage split apart, scattering seats, luggage and bodies across the snow. When the wreckage finally came to rest, the silence was deafening. 12 passengers died on impact. Another 5 succumbed to their injuries within hours. The remaining 28 survivors found themselves stranded in a frozen hellscape, surrounded by the twisted carcass of the plane and the looming shadows of impassable peaks. The temperature at night plunged to 22 degrees. There was no food, no medical supplies, and no hope of immediate rescue. The initial radio distress calls yielded no response. Search teams had already called off the hunt, assuming no one could have survived the crash. As days turned into weeks, starvation and despair set in. The survivors huddled in the wrecked fuselage, using seat cushions as insulation against the killing cold. Their meager rations, a few chocolate bars and some wine, were gone within days. Then came the unthinkable decision: to consume the flesh of the dead to stay alive. It was a moral abyss none had ever imagined facing, but the alternative was certain death. With silent prayers and trembling hands, they did what they had to do. Yet even this grim measure was not enough. An avalanche buried the fuselage, killing 8 more and suffocating the survivors under tons of snow. Those who clawed their way out faced a new nightmare. Now they were exposed to the elements, with no shelter. Still, they refused to give up. 2 of the strongest, Nando Parrado and Roberto Canessa, made a desperate plan. If rescue wasn't coming, they would walk out. On December 12th, after 60 days in the mountains, Parrado and Canessa set out wearing makeshift snow gear stitched from airplane insulation. For 10 days, they trekked through waist-deep snow, scaling ridges and battling altitude sickness, their bodies fueled by little more than sheer will. Finally, on the 10th day, they spotted a Chilean farmer on horseback. Help came at last. When helicopters reached the crash site, only 16 men remained alive. They had endured 72 days in the Andes, surviving plane crashes, avalanches, starvation, and freezing temperatures. Their story became a testament to the extremes of human endurance, the lengths people will go to in order to survive, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of death. The Andes did not forgive easily. It had taken 29 lives and pushed the survivors to the edge of humanity. But against all odds, 16 walked away, proving that even in the cruelest of places, the will to live can defy the impossible. The night of December 24, 1971, should have been quiet. Over the Amazon rainforest, the air was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to skin and made every breath feel heavy. Lancer Flight 508, a Lockheed L-188 Electra, cut through the darkness on its way from Lima to Pucallpa, carrying 86 passengers and 6 crew. Among them was Juliane Koepcke, the 17-year-old daughter of German zoologists, returning home after final exams. The flight was supposed to be uneventful, just another routine trip over the jungle, but nature had other plans. At 21,000 feet, the plane entered a thunderstorm. Lightning flickered like a strobe light, illuminating the cabin in flashes of white. Then, without warning, a bolt struck the right wing. The explosion was instantaneous. The aircraft shuddered, then disintegrated mid-air. Passengers were ripped from their seats, sucked into the void as the fuselage broke apart. Juliane, still strapped into her seat, felt herself falling, plummeting through the storm, the wind screaming in her ears. She blacked out before impact. When she awoke, it was daylight. The rainforest canopy had broken her fall, the dense foliage acting like a net. She was alive, but barely. Her collarbone was broken, her right eye was swollen shut, cuts and bruises covered her body. Around her, the jungle was eerily silent. No wreckage, no other survivors. Just the endless green and the distant calls of birds. For days, Juliane wandered. She had no food, no clean water, no idea where she was. The jungle was merciless. Venomous snakes slithered past her feet, insects feasted on her wounds, and the heat sapped her strength, but she remembered her father's advice: follow the water. So she did, stumbling along streams, praying they would lead her to civilization. On the 10th day, she found a boat, then a shack, and then, miraculously, people. Loggers took her in, nursing her back to health before she could be flown to a hospital. Juliane was the sole survivor of Lancer Flight 508. 91 others had perished, their bodies lost somewhere in the endless green. She had fallen 2 miles through the sky and lived, but hers was not the only miracle that night. Days after the crash, search teams scoured the jungle for wreckage. They found almost nothing, just scattered debris and a few personal effects. The rainforest had swallowed the plane whole. Then a month later, a hunter stumbled upon a man deep in the wilderness. He was emaciated, barely conscious, his clothes in tatters. When rescuers reached him, they realized who he was: Francisco Pizarro, a passenger who had also survived the crash. Unlike Juliane, Francisco had no memory of the fall. He woke up in the jungle, disoriented and alone, with no idea how he had gotten there. For weeks he wandered, eating insects and drinking rainwater, convinced he would die, but somehow he kept moving, until the hunter found him. 2 survivors, 1 crash, 2 impossible stories of endurance. The jungle had taken nearly everyone, but it had spared 2. The airfield at Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport was quiet in the pre-dawn hours of August 14, 2013, the kind of stillness that comes just before the chaos of morning flights begins. The FedEx Express cargo plane, a Boeing 727, sat, heavy with its load, packages sorted, manifests checked, engines humming as the crew prepared for the short hop to Memphis. In the cargo hold, James Robinson, a 24-year-old baggage handler, made one last check of the secured containers. He didn't know it yet, but in 17 minutes he would be fighting for his life in a way no one had ever survived before. The takeoff was routine. The plane climbed smoothly, the Alabama landscape shrinking below as it reached cruising altitude. Then, without warning, the unthinkable happened. A cargo door latch failed, the pressurized cabin explosively decompressed, and James, who had been securing a loose pallet near the rear, was sucked violently toward the gaping maw of the open door. There was no time to scream. One moment, he was inside the plane. The next, he was tumbling through open air at 8,000 feet, the wind roaring in his ears like a freight train. Instinct took over. He spread his limbs, trying to stabilize his fall, but the ground rushed up at him with terrifying speed. A farmer in a field near Talladega would later say he saw what looked like a black trash bag falling from the sky, until it hit the ground with a sickening thud. Miraculously, James was alive. The impact had been brutal. His right leg shattered, ribs cracked, lungs bruised. But he had landed in a freshly ploughed field, the soft earth absorbing just enough of the force to spare his life. He had no parachute, no training, just sheer dumb luck. For nearly an hour, he lay there drifting in and out of consciousness until the farmer who had seen him fall finally reached him. By then, the FedEx plane had made an emergency landing, the crew unaware that they had lost a man mid-flight. When rescuers arrived, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. No one survived a fall like that. No one. But James did. After months of surgeries and rehabilitation, he walked again. The FAA investigation would later reveal that a faulty Dr. Seal had caused the decompression, leading to new safety regulations. But for James, the miracle wasn't just that he lived. It was that he had defied physics itself. The sky had tried to kill him. The earth had tried to break him. And yet, against all odds, he survived the end.